All right, let's take a closer look at the concept called demand. Now, again, demand has this happiness score that we talked about, which we again defined. It can come from several places, but I want to jump right into the illustration of demand. So, consumers are willing to pay certain prices for certain quantities, and remember the relationship is what we call an inverse relationship, meaning that the higher prices, the less they want, the lower prices, the more they may buy, and that is where you get demand. Now, we talked about things that influence this demand again last time. So taste and preferences, there's lots of things that really change the way demand works. However, what we're going to focus on now is there are two ways that we look at this demand in the marketplace, especially considering price. So, and that is the concept of change in demand. So what is that? Well, that is when we have things like the number of consumers that changes either up or down. The same things that we talked before about health concerns. The same things that we talked before about trends in the marketplace. All of these are the factors in demand, and they can change the way consumers want products. And so what happens is you come in here and you have a market and you have a established demand. I'm going to identify as demand 0. But if any of these change, for example, let's just say with the number of consumers, that's a big one. So the number of consumers that would want a product is going to cause demand to shift to the right. So that is going to be what we would call an increase in demand. Now, there are also situations that could happen where we don't have an increase in consumers. We have a decrease in the number of consumers. So that would cause demand to shift this direction, and that would be a decrease in demand. And so with these, you have this concept of supply again. So I'm going to just draw it right here on this graph. And so you can see that when we're at a equilibrium point of today, this is where our price and quantity connections would be released. Remember, when we have these relationships, we can kind of find our equilibrium price there and quantity. So that's what the market says it wants. However, if you have more consumers come into the marketplace, then that's going to create an equilibrium that's higher. And so when you have an increase in demand, like demand 1, you end up with a higher price and you end up with a higher quantity, which from a supply perspective, that's what producers want. However, if you have another situation where you lose consumers, then you can see you have this lower situation, and so we call that a decrease in demand, and this decrease in demand is going to cause price to go down and quantity to go down. And so this would be what most consumers or most suppliers would be considered to be a bad situation. So everything that producers do in the marketplace when it comes to demand is to try to increase it. This is their target. They really would like to see this situation happen. So how do they do that? Well, they don't focus on production costs. They don't focus on really even maybe quality of production. They have to focus squarely on these factors that we talked about up here. And they really go back to the happiness factor that consumers have. So how can producers get D1 to happen? And that's just to make consumers happier, which is really what we do in a lot of our marketing campaigns. Now, how does this affect price? Well, there are other ways that the market demand can change. And so this is changes in quantity demanded. So not everything that changes in our marketplace is going to be as easy as just making consumers happier. So let's take a look at what does this look like. Well, everywhere that you have in the normal demand curve is potentially a price, right? It could be any of these prices all the way down to 0, or it could have any quantity all the way across here. Well, things might happen that really don't change the number of consumers. It really just changes market perspective. And so changes in quantity demanded are not a shift in the line, but they are a change in slope. And this is what happens more and more. So you've got demand base again, demand 0. And you could have a movement in other products that doesn't really add consumers to the market. It actually just moves the line with a rotation of slope. Now, this would still be an increase in demand, but it's increase in quantity demanded, not an increase in demand. Now, that would be a good situation. You could also have the bad situation that we talked about earlier where demand rotates way down, and this would be things like, so this would be the decrease again, and that's the decrease in quantity demanded. There should be a D by each one of those. So the idea of this is that the quantity demanded, change in quantity demanded, is affected by several situations, and it may be taste and preferences, it may be trends in the marketplace. We don't really get new consumers. What we get are these changes in kind of a little bit about what they would want. And so this is called a change in quantity demanded. Same concept is true. Producers would like to figure out how to influence this to move up there. So things like, and I have it written up here actually, really, things like health concerns, these are going to be the things that really change quantity demanded. So health, trends in the marketplace, these things will change that. What changes up here, probably I should get rid of some of this stuff here. What changes up here would be more about, get rid of some of that, more about the number of consumers, and we also talked about the amount of money that they have to use, so budget. So there are things that can change the quantity demanded, and that's a different number. That's what we want to focus on. And then there are things that actually talk about changes in demand. So you've got really two ways that we look at this. Now, when we move down here, we're going to talk a little bit more about it in the next presentation. But we have something called elasticity of demand. Now, elasticity of demand, it has to do with the change in quantity demanded. So that's what it really focuses on. Change in demand that we talked about up here in number 1 is really kind of a big picture. We would love to have a bunch more of consumers come in. We'd love for them to have a bunch more money to spend because they'll just do what they did at a higher level. However, most of the changes are more of quantity demanded, and they have a whole lot to do with elasticity of demand. So what is elasticity of demand? Well, it's this concept that the percent change in quantity, so that changes when we have a percent change in price. Now, it may change without price moving at all because of demand factors. But this percent change in quantity over percent change in demand has to do with this concept of, well, it's over 1. So what does that mean? That means percent change in quantity is greater than percent change in price. And so that would be a concept that we would call elastic demand. So meaning that that is going to be where consumers are very sensitive to price. So very sensitive to price. So this concept of elastic demand is really pretty tough if you're a marketing person. You're trying to figure out ways to lower the price or offer incentives because you know they're very sensitive to price, and you can hopefully get more people to buy. Now, what's another type of elasticity of demand? And that's when the percent change in quantity, same concept, percent change in price, that's when it's less than 1. Now, that lets you know that the percent change in quantity, in other words, how much they react, is less than the percent change in price. So what do we call that? We call that an inelastic demand. Now, this idea is that they are not sensitive to price. So most marketers are really trying to push the product price up, and at the same time they have to try to add value, but they're not sensitive in price. Now, if we look at elasticity of demand, it is not really easy to follow because the idea about price and quantity is that demand's usually not a straight line. Demand is usually more of a curved line such as this. So it really lets us know that this is kind of a midpoint in the market. So you could all agree that this is a high price area up here, and this is a lower price area down here. So really what we look at is that most time we have elastic demand whenever prices are high. Inelastic demand, sorry about that. Inelastic demand is going to be where we have these lower prices down here. And so the concept of demand really is not as simple as just either one or the other. It can change over time. So what we find out is then when you have elastic demand, you have a much flatter demand curve, meaning that any small change is going to mean a big change in the quantity. Now when you have inelastic demand, you have the line more straight up and down, really where you could change price quite a bit and then the change in quantity is pretty small. And so you have two types of demand. You have elastic type of demand and you have inelastic type of demand, and then you have elastic type of demand here. And these are the two, basically what we call types of demand curves. So which one do you want? As a producer, which one of these do you want? Well, it depends. It really does. Inelastic demanded curves and elastic demanded curves have different types of products. So elastic types of curves are usually high price, and they usually are trying to add value big time because they don't have any other way to maybe make them worth more. They know consumers are sensitive. Now, inelastic demanded products, these are products that we're trying to push on price. Value is always something to focus on, but we have an opportunity to raise it. What are some examples here? Well, it depends on the food you look at, but a lot of food products in the US are low price relative to amount of resources, and so there's a lot of opportunities that companies do to raise the price of food.